Welcome in, folks, here for Hack City's Week 2 college football preview. Or more so, should I be saying welcome to Colin, who has managed to, despite the stream not even starting for 10 minutes, completely flooding the chat with questions. Folks, anyone who might hop in later or who's just joining us, if you want to beat anyone out to be the top listener, the man you have to beat is Colin, who I know you're trying to be funny. I appreciate it. It makes me feel good. It also looks like people are interacting with the chat and the algorithm likes it. So, Colin, much appreciated. No, I'm not going to sit here and only answer questions from you as you asked in the chat. But towards the end, Colin, if you are still sticking around, I will gladly answer as many of those questions as we can get to, assuming that maybe there aren't any other questions from any other listeners that do hop in. So, we have 4 fantastic games that are coming up this weekend. The lineup that we have is not as exciting as it was last week. We had a fantastic week 1 slate of college football, especially what we witnessed between Florida State and LSU. Notre Dame, Ohio State was a very close, hard-fought battle. And then not to mention the fact that the game kicked off with a really competitive battle between Pitt versus West Virginia. You guessed it, folks. We're going to be talking about Pitt again today. Yes, Colin, I do have other listeners. Thank you for being very nice to me. The 4 games that we're going to be talking about today that we're going to be previewing is the one obvious one, Texas versus Alabama. Alabama is traveling to Austin to face off with the Crimson Tide. There is a lot of volatility on what people assume is going to happen in this game. I think most people are predicting that the Crimson Tide are going to win pretty handedly. After we talk about that game, we're going to talk about Tennessee versus Pitt, Kentucky versus Florida, and then Baylor versus BYU. So first, kicking things off, the early game that we have this week, Alabama facing Texas. I said after getting to see what Georgia was capable of that we pretty handedly knew that Georgia was the best team in the country. They beat a team that was ranked 11th, that maybe could be a top 25 team, but was arbitrarily ranked 11th at the start of the season. They embarrassed them on a neutral site ground, completely embarrassed them. This is now Alabama's opportunity to push back and to prove their reasoning on why they should be the number 1 team in the country. Going all the way to Texas, playing at the University of Texas in Austin, and embarrassing a very reputable program, one that is considered to be one of the favorites to win the Big 12. I firmly believe that Texas does not stand any bit of a chance in this game. Understandably, Steve Sarkisian has developed this program, has added some nice pieces, but they are still a year or 2 away from being as highly competitive as they possibly could become. They are not at that point where they can directly compete with a program like Alabama. It is going to take multiple years of recruiting for them to get to that point where they are actually capable of competing with a program like this. And Colin, you say it perfectly. Texas has a minuscule chance of winning. Maybe they cover. I think the spread right now is about 20 points from last I saw. I'm likely going to still, though, take Alabama to cover in this one. If for whatever possibility Texas is capable of being competitive, somehow keeping this close, keeping it within a score, it is going to require a dominant performance from Quinn Ewers and his star wide receiver, Xavier Worthy. Worthy was really good last season, and he is potentially a very strong player this year. He looked really nice in the first game that they played, albeit not against a very competitive opponent, rather. But they're going to need to outscore Alabama if they want to win. They are not going to defensively be capable of slowing down and stopping what Alabama brings to the table offensively. They have a strong offensive line, but the coupling of Jahmyr Gibbs and Bryce Young is going to be the most dynamic, explosive duo in the SEC between a running back and a quarterback. We got glimpses of it last week when they played Utah State, and that's not really a good example of what they can fully be because it's Utah State. But now it is the perfect proving point for Alabama to say, hey, you guys were all excited about Georgia. You were all excited by how badly they dominated, decimated Oregon. But we're here to prove that we can also knock around a historic, reputable program instead of doing it on a neutral site in a stadium that is basically in your backyard. We're going to travel to them and we're going to kick their ass. That is what Alabama is going to be thinking. That is what Alabama is going to be walking into this game. It's almost ironic that the approach for Alabama is now we need to show up to beat Texas. It almost should be we need to show up to prove that we're better than Georgia. That is how vastly different and how much of a lopsided advantage Alabama has against Texas, is that their focus right now is going to be a seesaw back and forth each week to prove who is the better team by embarrassing their opponent. Until we get to the SEC championship game and we can actually provide proof of who is the true king of the SEC at the end of the year. Both these programs are built very similarly. Very dominant defensive talent. We're going to get to see Will Anderson go off against a battered Texas offensive line. He might even have to face that one kid who's a freshman that's out there, which I am blanking on his name, but I am praying for that kid that he has to face Will Anderson on any reps during this game. He might end up with 3 to 4 sacks at the end of this game. But I don't think anyone should be shocked. If you're a Texas fan, be realistic. Be realistic. If you come out of this game and it is a 20-point loss, slightly less than a 20-point loss, and if it is a 17-point game, let's roughly say, that is an accomplishment. That is how much of a difference there is between these two programs when you compare the two rosters. Tennessee versus Pitt, we get a little bit more of a competitive matchup. And I talked very heavily about how Pitt underwhelmed for me against West Virginia. West Virginia proved more that they are a quality program rather than Pitt proving that they deserve to be ranked as the 13th ranked or the 17th ranked program in the country. They narrowly won, and more question marks were brought up on if Keaton Slovis is going to be able to get the job done in high pressure situations when the game comes down to the line. Can Keaton Slovis get the job done? I don't think he can. And right now, I believe Tennessee was not ranked coming into this into week one. They are now at the very end of the top 25. This is going to be a nice little added piece to their resume to being a mid-tier ranked team at the end of the season. Tennessee under Josh Heupel has improved, and I see them taking a step here where they can very easily beat Pitt. I know last year's game was a hard-fought battle between both these programs, and if I remember correctly, Pitt was the team that won this game. Colin, check that for me if you can. Pitt was the team that thank you for the prediction as well. Check that for me, though, if you can, if you're in front of a computer. This is very different, though. Hendon Hooker, far and away ahead above Keaton Slovis in terms of quarterback talent. Hendon Hooker has been one of the most under-talked about quarterbacks in the country. There are other guys that have gotten more of a nod, like Will Rogers has gotten more of a nod, which has never made any sense to me. Hendon Hooker is a fantastic athlete. He has really great touch. And I'm not just saying that I got to play against him and I got to see him in person, but yeah, Pitt won 41-34 last year over Tennessee. Very different Pitt team. Very, very different Pitt team. I understand that last week's game against West Virginia was a matchup that was a rivalry that had not been played in a long time. It was a very tense situation. That is a game that we all wanted to watch. It was exciting. But you now place them against an SEC team. You place them against Tennessee. It is not going to be a very competitive matchup. I don't know why I keep ending up having such an SEC bias on this show, but I'm like the biggest SEC hater on the internet, like out there. I don't know why this keeps happening. Like last week, somebody called me a homer for saying that Cincinnati was going to dominate against, or sorry, not Cincinnati. Arkansas was going to dominate against Cincinnati. And I'm not a homer. I'm from New Jersey. I'm not a USC homer. If anything, I'm a Notre Dame homer. Moving on to our next matchup, we have an SEC head-to-head battle, Kentucky versus Florida. I understand that this game means a lot for the final standings in the SEC. But I think this game also provides us with a very fun perspective if you look at the quarterback battle that we have going on here with Will Levis versus Anthony Richardson. I said this on the recap show. I said this on the NFL Draft Prospects show. Anthony Richardson has shown me more already in one game than I've seen in a whole season last year from Will Levis. I am already bought in entirely on Anthony Richardson. If he continues to play the way that he did in that first game, this man is going to win the Heisman if he can play and put together and string together a full season of performances. He is that good of a player. And it's really interesting if you compare him to Will Levis, because Anthony Richardson has put together the same type of traits and qualities that Will Levis has been lauded for. The athleticism, the arm strength, the ability to extend plays with his legs, the ability to run, the size. Anthony Richardson has put it together already. Will Levis has been a concern, and he's been a concern for me on if he can put it together. We now get a head-to-head battle between who can be quarterback 3 in this class. And I have to admit it to you, folks, it's going to be Anthony Richardson and Florida that wins this ball game. They proved to me last week, all I needed to see is what they did against Utah, how he played, how poised he played, the composure that Anthony Richardson brought to the table, the playmaking ability that he was able to bring up his team in situations where they needed him to make important plays to win that football game. And I think as good, as strong of a program as Kentucky is and how well coached they are not on the same level as what we saw Florida do in week 1. I have very, very high expectations for Florida in this game. I don't know if they can string it together for an extended season where they finish with 10 wins. I don't know if that's in the cards for Billy Napier just yet. But this game is going to help us properly determine the trajectory for Florida's season. They already proved to us once that they can beat the best team in the Pac-12. Utah is far and away the best team in the Pac-12. They've already proved that to us. You string together that win with a victory over Kentucky, who is a strong team, then the case can be made for a 10-win season. Maybe an upset of one of the other top teams in the SEC. This game is going to be so important for their resume. Colin, you threw in here Kentucky won 20-13 last year. Can they do it again? I don't think so. Yeah, I completely agree if you just heard what I had to say, but this team, the dynamic and the power shift between these two teams is very different. And we have to remember last year, that Florida team was poorly coached. It was a mess. And there's a reason why Billy Napier was brought in and hired. And it seems like all the issues that they had, all the culture issues that they had, they seem a lot more cohesive as a unit. So I don't even want to look at last year's result. And to know that it was only a 7-point game with the mess of a season that they had last year gives me some pretty good faith that they can win this game in week 2 of the college football season. So the last game before we get to questions, we've got a crap ton of them from Colin. Anyone else who's joining in, you see the pin comment there. Drop any thoughts or comments. We're going to get to them at the very end. Last game, Baylor versus BYU. BYU is joining the Big 12. Baylor probably going to stay in the Big 12 until we get more conference realignment news. This has a lot of implications for the final season standings on if BYU can prove that they are maybe a sneaky top 10 team. I personally do not think that they have that in them, but you get a victory over Baylor, it's going to help you make the case. They've got a really difficult schedule, actually. They have a really tough schedule that they have to play throughout this season. And it starts off playing against Baylor. They kicked the crap out of South Florida last week. They made them look silly. And South Florida is like a decent program, not a very good team, but they made them look absolutely silly with the way that they played. Jaron Hall, their starting quarterback, had a decent performance, but I point to the running back duo that shined last week. The yards per attempt was nuts. Christopher Brown Jr. and Puka Naku, I think is the pronunciation on that one. They have a very, very nice pairing of these guys. And that's what always has made BYU good, is when they have a nice grouping of running backs that they can consistently rely on. I believe Christopher Brown Jr. is the better of the bunch, but we saw how good Tyler Algier was last year. He's gone. He's now an Atlanta Falcon. It's next man up. I know that Zach Wilson came out and he was a very highly drafted kid. Jaron Hall is not that guy. He is not going to be a top 5 quarterback. He gets the job done, but the identity of this team is running the football. It helps that they have a talented offensive lineman in Blake Freeland, who is just getting better and better, a physical freak, massive kid. How well they show up and run the football in this game against a very, very well-coached Baylor defense. They lost a good amount of important players last year to the NFL because they produce guys that are that good. You know, they are a very, very well-coached program that is consistently putting guys out. But they return, I look at all the key important players that they return. Gabe Hall is really good. Dylan Doyle is a really strong player. But the one big dog that they got in the middle, somebody I am very, very high on, Siaki Ika, man, playing in the middle. That dude is a freaking dump truck. He takes up 2 gaps because of how freaking wide he is. He is their starting nose. He, I think, is good enough to play multiple shades on any defensive front. He is going to be a potentially highly drafted kid. Gives me some shades of Vita Vea, who somebody pointed out to me that apparently there is some relation there. But Siaki Ika is going to be the determining factor if BYU can run the football. That A gap on either side is going to be clogged by wherever Siaki Ika is. And if he comes to play and has a very good game, which he has done very often in his career, it could be a very, very long day. And they might have to heavily rely on Jaron Hall to throw the football. The interesting fold that we get with Baylor, and I'm excited to see more of, is Blake Shapin, who is now their starting quarterback and was announced as the starter at the beginning of the season. Former 4-star recruit. This is his first real opportunity this year to show his capabilities as a starting Big 12 quarterback. He shined a little bit against Albany. That's Albany. Very bad FCS program this year. Showed off some of those nice traits that he brings to the table. This is his first real test. This is his first opportunity to say, hey, guys, this is how good I can be. Did they make the right decision picking him as the starting quarterback this year? I think he's got the tools. I think he's got the capability. And Colin, to answer your point, it is not going to be BYU by 12. That Baylor defense is really freaking good. And I don't think it is as safe to say that this is a 2-point score game like you're claiming it's going to be. And yes, I did just badmouth an FCS team. Albany sucks. I hate Albany. I played against Albany 4 times in my career. One of the worst stadiums I have ever played in. Albany sucks. But I'm picking Baylor in this one. I think Baylor is going to come out with the victory. As high as I am on BYU to have a strong season, I am definitely 100% going with Baylor in this one. All right, we're taking questions. Colin sent us a laundry list of questions, and we're going to get to them. Why do you want to bring up Pitt? We're going to move on from that. Anyone else who is interested in asking questions, feel free to drop them in. We're going to get to them. So, Colin, really like this one Thoughts on game day, adding longtime friend of the pod, Pat McAfee. I got to say, first of all, meeting Pat McAfee at Radio Row was one of the coolest experiences that I've ever had. I did the bit where I asked if I could snap him a football, and he was really juiced up by it. That was a really fun experience for me. I think this is perfect. And the fact that he wasn't added previously as a staple of College Game Day is quite odd that they didn't make that effort to do so, because the guy is really freaking talented. He is the face of all levels of football right now. He is what is a mover of the conversation for college and NFL football. I think his expertise is much better in the NFL from listening to his show, but he brings a different dynamic, that almost frat bro, here to have fun type of dynamic to College Game Day. Colin also asking, is Notre Dame going to be able to top Marshall? Colin, you know the answer to that question. Marshall's not that good. They looked fine last week, and I keep seeing Ryan tweeting articles about them. They played Ohio State close. So let's not play this game. Notre Dame's going to be fine against Marshall. They don't have another test for a little bit, so let's not pretend that Marshall is some world-beating team that's going to come in and upset them. You bring up the Wisconsin-Washington State game. That is, I do completely agree, is a very interesting matchup, because Wisconsin is a ranked team right now. Graham Mertz has still not necessarily established if he's the guy. The quarterback position is a big question mark. Really good defensive team. But the thing that intrigues me about this game is the first real test for Cam Ward, who transferred from Incarnate Word and is now a member of that Washington State team. The kid is really freaking talented. We were talking earlier on this show, if you're just joining in, about the talent of Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. And Cam Ward stacks up with those guys. If he can bring it all together and he can string together performances this season, could be a top 5 quarterback in the class. But he's got to prove himself first. And this is that first opportunity, going up against a Big Ten defense as good as Wisconsin's and putting up a really good stat line. Not saying he needs to be totally error-free, but if Cam Ward makes some of those crazy nutty throws that he made at Incarnate Word, where, he's evading pressure, he's throwing on the run, he has a Patrick Mahomes type arm. That is how strong of an arm that Cam Ward has. The dude can freaking sling it. So yes, 100%, you bring up a really good point that Wisconsin versus Washington State is an underrated game. I'm ignoring the Lafayette over Temple comment. Actually, I'll entertain this. Possible. Temple sucks. Temple's a terrible program this year. They have not been good for, it seems like, since Matt Rule was there. Not a very, very competitive program. This is just a comment. Spencer Petras going to give the game away to Iowa State. Yeah, I think Iowa State is much better equipped to win this football game than Iowa is. They got some pieces on offense, but like Will McDonald chasing after Spencer Petras, that dude is a statue. He has a very lame arm, and he can barely complete passes that are over 5 yards. Spencer Petras looked horrible against South Dakota State. And as much as I talk up South Dakota State, that is an FCS defense, and he looked horrible. Iowa State's going to win that game pretty easily. I hate to admit it. If you put a better quarterback on that team with that defense that they have with Jack Campbell and Justin Jacobs, that is capably a top 15 team in the country. But instead, we have to freaking watch Spencer Petras every goddamn week. I'm sick of it. How is Nichols going to fare against ULM? A little bit too in the weeds for me. Eastern Washington having a shot against Bo Nix. I'm not saying that there is a realistic shot. There is like a 10% chance that Eastern Washington can maybe upset Oregon. This is actually an interesting one to pay attention to. I have faith in Dan Lanning to properly prepare his team after getting embarrassed by Georgia. But if anyone is going to rapidly come out, shock a big name FBS program, this is actually one that you should keep your eye on. it could either be a major blowout in favor of Oregon, or the other side of this, because Eastern Washington, notoriously, for anyone who doesn't know about FCS teams, Colin does. I know he does. He's from frickin' Washington. He knows Eastern Washington. They always produce really high-powered offenses, very well-coached, explosive offenses. If you remember last year, Eric Berrier, anyone who saw, there was a graphic that was posted where he threw for like 7 or 8 touchdowns in a game. And Eric Berrier, no offense to him, small guy with a very limited arm. And he threw for 8 touchdowns against Idaho. I think he had something similar in a different game. Again, if anyone could do it this week to randomly pull off an unexpected upset, I would go with Eastern Washington against Oregon. That is not as unrealistic as I think people are willing to admit. All right, questions that we have here towards the end. Anyone else who's hopping in? Everyone. I feel like everyone funneled in at the end here after I previewed the games. Anyone who has any thoughts or questions about the week 2 slate of college football, feel free to continue to drop those in. Colin, you're asking, are they setting Pat McAfee up to replace Corso? I don't. The thing is, no one can replace Corso, and the other thing too is McAfee has become his own brand. He has become his own entity. He's got his own show. He's now on the FanDuel TV network that he's doing. I don't necessarily think that he's going to have the same level of commitment for Corso, but the dude's got to retire. I am like, it's painful to watch him every morning doing College Game Day. He can barely talk at this point. I love Lee Corso, but you got to know what, at a certain point, you got to hang it up. He's gotten to that point. I think that's going to be it for talking about these games. I don't think we've got any more comments that are coming in. Oh no, we got one more. These were hidden. I noticed you don't have the Notre Dame sweatshirt. I do have a question. You're getting bumped, Colin. Thank you, DJ, by the way. Really appreciate that. That really means a lot. You know what, DJ? You're the first to give a tip. It's a real honor. I really appreciate you doing that. That actually makes me like excited, because I was able to finally put that setting on, and I put it on a while ago, and I didn't know if anyone was going to do it, but DJ, that really means a lot. You threw in a comment here. Totally agree on Iowa. Petrus is the Achilles heel. Huge test for Cam Ward. Wisconsin defense seems to be even better than recent years, which is odd because they lost Leo Chenal last year, who was a freaking tank for them defensively. It was an absolute monster. And I was saying going into the season that Leo Chenal is going to be a highly contributing rookie for that Kansas City Chiefs team in that defense. But they still are really strong. Keanu Benton up the middle is a really, really nice player who plays at the nose tackle position. And he is developing into a very, very dominant interior presence. And they've got dudes all over the back end that play really, really well. I think that you look at that whole unit, that Wisconsin defense, it's kind of like Iowa, where except Graham Mertz is better than Spencer Petrus by a significant margin, where they don't really have a settled situation at the quarterback position, but they're able to rely on their really freaking good defense. But I think I have expectations for the possibility that Cam Ward comes out and has a really good game here, and that people start talking about him a little bit more as a prospect. He has all the capability. He has all the ability to be a top 5 pick. So DJ, you said Love Chenal drafted him 19th overall in your league's rookie draft in April. I forget if it was either you or another listener sent us a note about this league, but Chenal is a really fun player, a really fantastic athlete. And they lost him, and they still re-upped. They re-upped with talent across the board for that Wisconsin defense. It's going to be a really interesting one to see. Any other questions from people that we have hopping in here? I think that's going to be it from us, though. Again, DJ, thank you for the donation. Anyone else who feels generous, I don't even know how to act. I've never gotten a donation before, but again, thank you so much, DJ. Anyone else? Appreciate you all for tuning in and hopping in for this preview. We're going to be doing a recap show either Sunday morning before the NFL games or on Saturday night after the games have concluded. Might even do something after that Texas-Alabama game. But thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll be back with more. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the rest of your night.